All right. Here we are on Health a Second Opinion again today. Thank you very much for joining us. Looking forward to a discussion. And as you can see, I have a special guest, Dr. Charles Adams. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, I'll look forward to our discussion. And, we're going to be talking about health freedom. And, today's major topic is, of course, this COVID pandemic that's gone on, and we're going to see how things transition. And I think that looming in the distance is a vaccine possibly being promoted that could play a big role in the way that the government is going to deal with this pandemic. And I was just wondering, I think we had discussed prior to maybe going through the history of vaccines and just getting your input, and also just really that history. And so I'd like to hand this over to you and let you just sort of introduce yourself and get started.
Okay. I'm Dr. Charles Adams. I'm a medical doctor, a proud graduate of the University of Tennessee Medical School, and my official training is as an internal medicine specialist. And since that formal training, I've done a lot of other training in the areas of functional, integrative. I saw an interesting list of all the different ways you could talk about the things I do. And it just, for the most part, not mainstream, but we'll use the mainstream if we have to. And so, and somewhere along the way, I, of course, had a traditional education, and I vaccinated my children. I'm currently begging my children to not vaccinate my grandchildren. Wow. Because one way Dr. McDill and I can get in big trouble is by using a therapy that's never been studied for safety or effectiveness, efficacy. And unfortunately, that's the case with vaccines. I'm going to primarily speak from, and you see me shuffling papers here because most of the things I say, I want to be able to back up with, well, here's where I got this. Most recently, from the National Vaccine Information Center site, NVIC, National Vaccine Information Center. And I just remembered I forgot to pick up a horrific piece that they sent out yesterday on their website. They give weekly updates. Virginia has the legislatures of Virginia would not. They supposedly had open hearings, which they would let folks in favor of vaccines have unlimited amount of floor time. Whereas if you wanted to present the opposing opinion, you were limited to something like 5 or 10 minutes, and that was it. And they voted to make vaccines mandatory, and then handed that over to legislators. I mean, to agencies, and so the common man never really had a chance at, input. And my opinion is, if someone wants to get vaccinated. But if someone doesn't want to get vaccinated, they should have that right. And let me bring up the history of that. After World War II, where there were plenty of atrocities in the concentration camps, the United States signed on to the Nuremberg Code of Human Rights and the Helsinki Declaration governing biomedical research. Both of these insist upon the right of every patient and every experimental subject to be given informed consent to all medical and surgical procedures, and explicitly forbid administering them by force. And so, well, we've kind of gotten away from that. One of the more refreshing breaths of fresh air in all this is a physician by the name of Bob Zajac. Let me mention something, folks. As you're watching this, you might want to grab a pencil and a piece of paper, because we're going to mention some things you might want to look up and might find interesting. And I just mentioned one, Bob Zajac, Zajac. And as you look him up, he's a medical doctor. Click on the thing that has bully. There's a word bully in it, and he admits that he used to be a vaccine bully, and he got out of medical school, as did I. And he began to notice that there were patients that were seeing a local chiropractor that were healthier than the patients that were seeing him. And he finally had several aha moments, but finally came to the conclusion, doing this for 15 years now, I will share with you that the vaccinated kids are the sickest, the partially vaccinated kids are not as sick, and the unvaccinated kids are the healthiest. And those are quotes from Dr. Bob Zajac. And so he's not vaccinating now like he did back in the good old days. A historical document that is just, to me, just absolutely fascinating. It's a chapter excerpted out of a book, the second edition, Vaccination is Not Immunization. And it's the chapter Smallpox, Bringing a Dead Disease Back to Life.
Oh, wow.
And the smallpox vaccine is the grandfather of all vaccines, and kind of tickled me. In May of 1796, Edward Jenner inoculated 8-year-old James Phipps against smallpox by using cowpox pus.
And you said
the good old,
right?
huh?
Right. 1796, is that what you said?
1796. Jenner got the idea that if he drew pus out of the cowpox sores from the milkmaids that milked the cows, if he drew that cow pus out of that cowpox and then injected it into a human being, that they would forever and ever be totally immune from smallpox.
And how did that work?
It depends on, there are two sides to every story, and it worked marvelously, as you're going to ready to find out. There's some physicians by the name of Alfred Russel Wallace, a physician by the name of Walter Hodwin, Hawen, and J.B. Anderson are the historians that collected information about data. And they were shocked at how the medical world just swallowed Jenner's story, hook, line, and sinker. Jenner was not a physician. He never passed a medical exam in his life, completed any course of medical study, or received a diploma from any medical school. But I learned that he was the dude. Jenner bought his medical degree for 15 francs from St. Andrew's College in Scotland, which he never attended. Now, he was pitching this and going nuts, ranting and raving about all this stuff about vaccination. And it finally dawned on the English government how millions of pounds sterling could be moved around by passing a law making the new smallpox vaccine compulsory.
Okay.
And which they did. And forever, they made the smallpox vaccine pretty much the same way from cowpox pus. Up until they finally stopped administering it. By 1853, Parliament passed laws that made the untested vaccine compulsory throughout the British Empire. Once the economic implications of compulsory vaccinations were realized, few dared to disagree. Like I said, go to that website, www.nvic.org, National Vaccine Information Center.org. Same thing that happened then is unfortunately going now.
Yes, and interrupt for here. When we think about these things, that's one of the things I really want to bring up, and then we're going to get right back into some of the history of things, is that the opinion it's not an all or nothing thing, and it doesn't have to be one side or the other. It's about the real question being our liberties and freedoms to choose what happens to our own health and how we take a stand to be able to protect our liberties and freedoms. In my opinion, our health freedoms and just freedom in general, is being questioned right now. And so it's this thing that you said, the mandatory compulsory vaccination that is really the at-large.
It is incredibly frightening. And some other data pointed out in this history that they had villages.
Oh, you're paused out. Let's see if we can get you back.
Uh-oh.
There you go. Oh, kind of blurring there for a second.
They had villages that had compulsory vaccination.
Mm-hmm.
They held you down and vaccinated you. This was back in the days where sensitivity wasn't quite what it is now. And they found out it didn't work. And one of the biggest, the United States was the last country to stop using the smallpox vaccine, and used
Sorry, you're kind of breaking up there again. Dr. Adams. Well, folks, here we go. While we're working out our technical difficulties here, one of the biggest things, hopefully he'll be able to get that reinitiated. See, we're here, as you can see, we're in different places having this conversation through StreamYard, a great program. But anyway, so when we look at this, one of the biggest things, I want to stand up for is that, again, it's our health freedoms. I want us to, like, a great site that you can go to get some information and some research and some different things. Gosh, Dr. Adams, try to reach back out to me, and let's see if we can get you pulled back up in that invitation. I apologize. Somehow that link broke down with his internet. But so when we look at these things, it's about our health freedoms, and there's a site called Stand for Health Freedom. And so when this is a group, it's set up, it's lawyers who have gotten together with different lawyers in the different states. And what they've done is look at the legislation and the legislators and create a platform to where people can go onto this site, Stand for Health Freedom, and then join the movement. There are petitions for different, whether it be national or state. And then when you have legislation coming up in your area, they will email you. You should get an alert that tells you that there's something coming down the pipe being voted on in your state, and therefore how to either you can contact your legislators and utilize the information that they have to let them know that you don't want them to vote for this, or you would know that your legislators, there's something coming down the pike on vaccines. And if you're for it, then mandatory vaccinations, then I guess you could go there and send and give your piece to the legislators also. And so one of the biggest things here is that whether you are pro or against or somewhere in the middle, it's all about our own due diligence. It's about our liberties. And so one of the biggest things that I was really blown away with, and another very impressive thing. I don't mean to always brag on her, but my wife Megan, when we had our son Jonah, and she was pregnant with him, and I had told her my stance on vaccinations, and of course she and I, both growing up in the 70s, were fully vaccinated and went through this process, and thank God came out okay. But yet at the same time, here we go. All right. So at the same time, let me get him back in. There you are, sir. Give me just 1 second here to wrap up a statement, and we're going to get you right back in here. Thank you for getting back on. That I had gone through these vaccination processes, and one of the biggest things that I loved about my wife is that she did not take my stance, my beliefs, my data. What she did was she took the list of vaccinations, and she printed out the ingredient lists, all of the actual ingredients, and then what they call are the things that are to elicit the danger response. And so what's the word? It's the other things.
Excipients.
Excipients. Thank you very much.
Additives.
Yeah, exactly. And then she looked them up one by one. and then looked at their potential side effects, harm that could be happen. And she went through and did this for every single vaccine that was on the schedule and for every ingredient of every vaccine. And then about 2 months later, she comes back to me and says, okay, I agree. I'm like, you agree with me on what? And she's like, I agree with you on the fact that we're not going to vaccinate our son. And I said, oh my gosh, okay, why? And she told me what she'd been up to for the last couple of months. And I was like, that's the kind of diligence that our children deserve. And I think that I would challenge any patient out there, any parent, grandparent who is making decisions and you're influencing others in your sphere of influence to go pro or go negative for vaccines. Go on the sites, get a list of all those in the schedule, look for the ingredients, and then look them up yourselves. And maybe it'll take you, like did her, a couple of months to get through everything. But at the end of the day, you will know you've done your research, and you will know whether or not your heart is in it or out of it. And then you'll be able to weigh the harms versus the benefits. And that's the thing. Wherever there's a potential harm, there must be choice. That's what the whole thing of informed consent is about. And if there is not informed consent and you don't have the option to consent or refuse, then you are no longer a free human being, and then this is no longer a free country. So what do you have? So we were in the process there, and I know we've been trying to get you back on, so I'll just hand it back over to you.
Well, let me follow up on what you said. One of my better newsletters is edited by Dr. Jonathan Wright, Wright. He writes the Green Medicine newsletter, and the April 2017 edition, the other side of the official vaccination story. Over 400 research articles compiled in a new book tell a very different story about vaccinations than does the mainstream media. Just reading right from the article. And he talks about a book written by a gentleman by the name of Neil Z. Miller, Miller. And the book is Miller's Review of Critical Vaccine Studies. And it's 400 important scientific papers summarized for parents and researchers. In other words, this could have maybe saved your wife computer time. And
I'm sorry I didn't have that, honey.
I blew it. But Dr. Wright just hits a few of the highlights. Like he says, infants who receive the most vaccines have the worst hospitalization and death rates.
Wow.
And I just got this right before we got online. Got on the thing here. Dr. Vincent Linelli published online that the death rates for SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, has gone down 30% during COVID-19. It's normally 700 SIDS deaths per week, and now it's down to 500 SIDS deaths per week. And there you go.
That would be due to the fact that parents aren't going in for those routine vaccination schedule as per normally they would. Is that what we're concluding here?
That's the assumption.
Okay.
I think it's pretty valid. And another thing, point number 62 out of this book, annual vaccination against common strains of influenza reduces protective immunity against more dangerous strains of disease. Infection by common flu viruses actually stimulates children's immune system to have greater immunity to the more deadly strains of flu. Wow. Isn't that interesting?
Absolutely, because and anyone who has been down this vaccination schedule would say that that's why they end up having boosters and boosters and boosters, whereas the person who gets the disease develops true memory B cells, which then confers lifelong immunity. And that's the difference between getting it and getting immunized for it, per se.
And interesting, when you say that they get the disease, often they have the disease, but they know there's no manifestation, no typical outbreak, which is what we're seeing now with the COVID. I mean, a bunch of people get it, I mean, less than 1 out of 100 dies from it. But out of the folks, out of 100 people out of the random population, X% get the disease. Some get the flu. Most recover. Some never have any manifestations. They get it, they whip it, and they're done, and they never know they had it. So there.
Here's a question right here. Since you touched on that, I want to ask you this. What's your opinion on why this would be so? So I was on the CDC website last night, and I was looking at the numbers. And anyone go there, look at the statistics, go to the data section, and then look up how the healthcare workers, there's been some 3 million people in the healthcare who have gotten the COVID, who've contracted it. And then there's only been 581 of those people die. So the percentage is like a 0.05% death rate. Whereas in the general population, based on the numbers, there is around at the current data, 4%. As when I was looking on those CDC numbers of the general population. My thought was that the doctors and the healthcare workers that are in the trenches day in and day out were being constantly exposed to everything under the sun on a regular basis. And their immune systems are like just bulletproof. I mean, they are just so constantly immune challenged, that their immune systems are competent, whereas the general population may not be. What are your thoughts on that?
No, that you're 100% correct. As a matter of fact, one of the rites of passages in medical school is when you do your pediatrics rotation, you get sick as a dog because you haven't been exposed to all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. That was just where my brain went. Let's continue on with this.
Yeah. And like you said, that's how our immune system does what it's supposed to do, and that is protect us. It's got to get exposed to the bad guys. And along those lines, I don't have this paper here with me, but I can pull it up. There's scientific data. There are many studies, randomized controlled trial studies that have been done with the masks, and the masks have been studied and proven to not work. The particles are too small. The only way you're going to get protection is if you get a full rubber seal all the way around the mouth, and you're not breathing. You've got to breathe through an external filter, and then have that thing's got to be strapped on your head so there's no leakage. I mean, in other words, you could get sprayed down with nerve gas and be okay. Otherwise, anything else it looks good, but it has never been demonstrated to reduce the infectivity of a viral illness. The masks are part of the hoax. Sorry, they don't work.
Well, and that's unfortunate. And people, again, whatever they choose to do, if that makes you feel more valid and that you are complying with trying to be, but also I think that exact data tells us that neither side should be shaming the other. And have you seen that? It's just a lot out there in public that there is a lot of this fear-based hate that's growing in this division between the sides of people on this topic. And that's something that I think is very tragic when we're all dealing with it, and we all should have an understanding that only history 50 years from now, looking back on this, will be able to shed enough light to say what was best and what wasn't.
Yeah, right now, one of the most significant chapters in the history of America is being written. And it's quite frightening what forces are at work that have scared everybody to death, because this is just an average flu season.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's nothing more to it. The only difference between this flu season and every other flu season has been the media has scared the bejeebers out of everybody. And
that's the other thing. And don't take my word for it, people. I was on the CDC's website last night. The recumbent test, the PCR test, put out by LabCorp, which is the only one that's been amended and licensed through the government to do this testing. If you read on down, you follow the link, through that site, it says that that test does not rule out a bacterial or other infection that is also a part of this, and therefore clinical decisions need to be made other than the test, correlations and determinations to determine treatment options and what is right for that patient versus right for somebody else. So that means that these polymerase tests and how they're taking an RNA virus and then turning it into this DNA and then amplifying it leaves room for error, and that these RNA viruses could be also the other influenzas. Like, we're not hearing regular flu data anymore because no one's coming down with the flu. It's all being ruled COVID. And so are we to then say that there is no more regular flu? Does that make any sense to you?
Well, none of it makes sense. But like I said, there are a lot of really basically evil influences that are pushing a lot of the buttons for this average flu season into what it's transformed into. And to give you some numbers on that, the worst flu season in recent memory was the 67-68 Hong Kong flu that killed over 100,000 Americans. We didn't change a thing we did. As a matter of fact, that's when Woodstock was. We didn't have a mass of dead hippies all over the place, you know.
Yeah.
More recently, the 14-15 flu season killed around 51,000 Americans. The 17-18 flu season killed around 61,000 Americans. And those numbers weren't suspect or being pressured in terms of how did you document the death, doctor, because as most folks know, physicians have been pressured to, if someone comes in and dies of a heart attack, did it look like that person could have possibly had COVID? Well, maybe COVID. You know, someone comes in and dies of a heart attack. COVID, stage 4 cancer. Same question. Could this person have possibly maybe had COVID? And they are signing the death certificate as death due to COVID. And so what the numbers we're seeing right now, it's hard to truly know who died from COVID and who was, didn't really die from COVID.
And I'll leave you, this is amazing. Joe Arve, a fellow chiropractor friend of mine, that was his dad had cancer. It was end-stage heart failure. He had been on dialysis for a couple of years. He had been through his whole body was shutting down. And then he died of his own devices, basically. And then on his death certificate, it was labeled a COVID death. And he, and of course, Joe is up in arms, and so many other people are also with this. And so we're down to 1 minute here. So I want you to, what would you like to leave people with here in the next minute?
Mandatory vaccination is rolling our way, and it's rolling hard and fast. Make your own decision. And if you don't think forced vaccination is a good idea, let every elected official that you vote for, let them know. This is at the city, county, state, national level. Sooner the better.
Absolutely. Stand for Health Freedom, great site. National Vaccine Information Center, great site. Go there, vote, folks. This is about democracy. This is about our freedoms and our liberties, and it's on the edge. We're at that breaking point. And so I would challenge you here on Health a Second Opinion to back yourself up and go out there and vote. Thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it, and we'll see you again soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you.